The prelude to the story begins with a man firing a rifle in the woods at dawn. He does that before running from someone in a panic. As he hides behind a tree, we see a figure in the distance. The man keeps running until he falls. He frantically gets up, but doesn't collect his rifle. Suddenly, he gets caught by the very thing he was running from. It seems like he was running from a vampire because we see his sharp teeth that soon pierce the man's neck. But the strongest evidence that the chaser is a vampire is that once sunlight shines on him through the trees, he starts burning. Putting his hand into the sunlight, the man who was chased gets burned too. Due to being bitten by a vampire, he has now become one. In a short time, he sees the vampire who bit him has burnt into a pile of ashes. The man continues to run, protected by the shadows of the trees. He is lucky to find a blanket that he uses to cover himself from his new enemy, the near omnipresent daylight. He uses it as he runs out of the woods, until he finds a shed to hide in. The next scene has a boy named Stanley entering his kitchen to see his parents sharing an intimate moment. His father asks him if he wants them both to go to their cabin this weekend. Stanley excitedly agrees to that. We see the family gets along very well. The parents are loving, and the boy seems to appreciate every bit of their affection. Suddenly, disaster strikes. We see a glass of juice falling and shattering on the floor. Stanley looks at his mother to see her in a horrific zombie form. This sight frightens him immensely. He comes to hold her before she falls in his arms. Thankfully, this is a nightmare Stanley soon wakes up from. Lying in his bed, he hears a man banging on his door, disgruntled that it's locked. When Stanley unlocks it for him, the man enters, a completely opposite version of the loving father we just saw. All he does is scold the poor boy. He is Stanley's grandfather, someone whom Stanley tries hard to ignore. Yet the man doesn't like it. He nearly yells at his grandson, saying he fought in a war when he was Stanley's age. The moment Stanley talks back with anger, his granddad slams him against the wall. He lets him know that he is the only reason Stanley is not living in the juvenile hall anymore. While Stanley is in his house, he must obey his rules. He demands a response from the boy if he is clear about that. So Stanley tells him yes, with forced respect. With that unpleasant interaction out of the way, the boy leaves for school. Outside, he puts on his headphones to cut out the man's continuous yells of disparagement toward him. He gets on his bicycle. We see the place he lives in is the same place that contains the shed that the new vampire entered. As Stanley rides his bike on the road, some hooligans of similar age drive in a car in the opposite direction. The driver intentionally almost drives into Stanley to deliver a scare. This causes the poor boy to ride his bike accidentally into the sheriff's truck. A stern deputy exits the vehicle to inspect it for damage. After finding none, he tells the boy he's lucky the truck is in the same condition. Since the boy spent time in juvenile hall, the officer tells him he will be on to him if Stanley makes a mistake past his 18th birthday. He turns that age in 1 month, which will open the possibility of him doing jail time. Sheriff Dorney is a lot softer on him, letting the boy go. The deputy is troubled by her leniency toward him. She tells him Stanley needs a break. After that, the boy enters school. We see those kids that scared him in the car are giving another kid a hard time. Seeing it, Stanley comes to his rescue. He grabs the main hooligan, whose name is Marble. Before it escalates, a teacher comes to break it up. The boy Stanley stood up for is Dahmer. Stanley walks outside with him, where Dahmer expresses his hatred for that troublesome trio. They walk quite a way until they settle on a couch outside. There they talk about a girl named Roxy. Dahmer complains that she abandoned them for Marble. He talks ill of the girl, but Stanley defends her. At home in the attic, Stanley looks at his family photo. We see he misses his parents. Whatever happened to them, he would probably do anything to get them back. We should also take note that he's in the attic to very likely avoid his grandfather. He is a man Stanley cannot stand. He takes out a knife, stabbing it into the floor with anger. Soon enough, his grandfather starts ruining his quiet time by yelling for the boy to mow the lawn. When he is outside with his dog, the animal barks at the shed, so Stanley enters it. To his surprise, he finds some human teeth inside. Suddenly, the man who hid there comes out to roar at Stanley. This prompts the boy to quickly exit the shed. He mistakes the vampire for a junkie. He gives the man a chance to leave unharmed. If he doesn't, Stanley will set his dog on him. Since the vampire isn't leaving, Stanley does exactly that. Yet, instead of the dog injuring him, it sounds like the dog itself gets wounded. Stanley calls out to the dog a few times. Shortly after, the door opens, and its head gets tossed out. This scares Stanley to the point of running into the house to collect a knife. His grandfather enters, hearing from the boy that a madman is inside the shed, and he just took the life of their dog. However, the man doesn't believe it. He tests Stanley's statement by whistling to the animal. It does not come to him, making the boy's granddad head over to the shed. He finds the poor dog's head near the shed. Angered, he yells at the man inside. He also threatens him with violence like his grandson did. After counting to 3, he enters the shed, armed with a mere stick. Stanley hears him yelling that no one is there except for his deceased dog. Then the boy hears him scream in pain. He cautiously approaches the shed to open the door. His grandfather falls out in a severely wounded state. Stanley grabs his arms, but the vampire pulls him back in. After what he just witnessed, Stanley behaves smartly by securing the door with chains. He doesn't know what he saw, yet he knows this person must be locked inside. Blood gushes from under the door, frightening him back inside the house. He grabs his lifeless granddad's beer to collect himself. Later, he starts boarding up the windows of the shed. It is now sundown and Stanley does not know that a vampire is inside the shed. When darkness comes, he could be in serious trouble. At night, he looks at the shed from his room's window. Before lying in bed, his heart full of fear, Stanley wakes up to someone trying to open his locked door. He thinks it could be his grandfather. Once the fumbling of the doorknob stops, he slowly gets up to approach the door. He is brave enough to open it and step outside his room. A voice whispers his name. He peeks into another room before the voice says his name louder, scaring him some more. As Stanley descends the stairs, the voice keeps whispering his name. Coming outside, he sees light emanating inside the shed. A loud voice from inside causes him to wake up for real. Again, he is full of fear. The next scene has him at school, where a girl comes to talk to him. She is Roxy, saying that she knows he doesn't like that she was with Marble. Shrugging it off, Stanley tells her he wasn't going to say anything about it. He says people judge others not for who they are, but who they surround themselves with. The girl wants him to know that Marble and his friends weren't always hooligans. They are now, Stanley replies. That's what matters. Roxy defends herself, claiming that if it makes her life easier to be with one crowd over another, she will do it. Stanley gives her a rather sage response, that the behavior she described could go on for the rest of one's life. It doesn't end with the end of school. Roxy doesn't want to believe that. Soon the conversation revolves around parents, and Roxy says they all hate theirs. Stanley does not disagree with her completely. He hates his parents for not being there with him. Stanley wants to tell her about what happened to his grandfather. As he starts talking about it, Dahmer calls out to him from behind. Roxy leaves abruptly, which upsets the boy who likes her. Dahmer apologizes that he scared away the girl that he labels as Stanley's girlfriend. Afterward, Dahmer walks alone. The trio of bullies rides beside the boy to give him some more trouble. He responds by showing them the finger. This riles them up, and they come out to beat him. Back at home, Stanley looks at the shed from the window. The vampire inside tries to open it, yet he cannot. We have to wonder why he can't break through the wooden building. He was, after all, capable of removing a dog's head with his hands. Stanley equips himself with a baseball bat prior to approaching the shed. He comes close to it, calling out to whoever is in there. When he receives no response, he comes closer to ask again. At that moment, the vampire breaks through the door to grab him. Now it's starting to make sense. That's the strength a vampire is supposed to have. However, due to the sunlight burning his arms, he is forced to let go of Stanley. Following this, Dahmer arrives to show him what Marble and his friends did to him. Of course, this is a very inappropriate time to be doing that. Stanley informs him there is something dangerous in the shed. He already realized the creature isn't human. After telling Dahmer about what the vampire did, he says the monster is going to take his life if he gets out. But Stanley's friend doesn't believe him. To believe, he must see. Having observed what sunlight could do, Stanley already knows he has to cover the new hole before sunset. While he's in the process of finding something, Dahmer walks to the shed because he hears someone calling his name. Stanley warns him that he's too close to it. Yet curiosity is a strong thing and Dahmer does not listen. Once the boy gets very close, the vampire shows himself to scare him. Stanley quickly places a metallic plate on the door's hole to cover it. After the duo secures the door, Dahmer reacts excitedly based on what he just experienced. He claims they are safe due to their possessing a pet monster. He instantly starts scheming about how to use this situation to improve their lives. It is no surprise that the vengeful boy wants to get Marble with his friends to the shed and have the vampire claim them. But Stanley is of a sensible mind, arguing that this isn't any kind of gift. This is dangerous. His friend argues back that he has had enough of being beaten up by that trio regularly. When he sees the frustration with which Dahmer talks, Stanley knows he can't change his mind so easily. He resorts to asking him softly if he can trust him about not misusing this situation. Dahmer agrees to it. Although he said he could be trusted, the boy looks at the shed in an interesting way. At night, Stanley is inside the house. watching a movie about vampires. How appropriate. In the movie, he hears a character speak of the 3 ways a vampire can be destroyed: burning by sunlight, the destruction of the heart, and decapitation. These are the only 3 ways to put an end to the nocturnal horrors. Eventually, he falls asleep. From one of his posters, a dressed-up Roxy comes out to join him in bed. As she is on top of him, she turns into a vampire to bite his neck. Stanley wakes up from this nightmare in a panic. The good news is that it's daytime, and he is alive. The vampire didn't break through the shed to condemn the boy to his final night. Following this, Stanley finds a way to make great use of his day. He comes to the shed with a drill, using it to create holes in the small building. By doing that, thin rays of sunlight trickle through, hurting the vampire. Stanley drills a decent number of them. When he's back inside the house, the sheriff knocks on his door. Seeing her there, he does not know what to do about it. Soon enough, he opens the front door. Dorney asks if his granddad is home, to which Stanley says he isn't. After that, she tells him that a man went into the woods, but never came back. His name is Joe Bain, someone who Stanley's grandfather had some trouble with a few months ago. She lets herself inside prior to showing Stanley a photo of the man who is now a vampire. He tells her the man is not familiar to him. If he sees anything, he is advised to call her. She also wants to give him a ride to school. This is not what he wants, but he has no choice except to go with the sheriff. Before exiting the house, Dorney sees the cane belonging to Stanley's grandfather lying on the floor. Once they arrive at school, she asks him if he has anything he wants to tell her. He does not. As Stanley walks inside the school's hallway, Roxy comes to him. She is concerned about the wounds on his face. Marble walks by to say something rude. After he makes a second rude statement, Stanley gets angry. He punches Marble to the floor, where he continues to deliver more hits. A staff member has to intervene and pull him off. He tells the angered boy they are going to have a meeting with his grandfather. He also informs Stanley that the sheriff is on her way to his house now to pick the man up. Hearing this, Stanley rushes out of there to go home. We see him running while the sheriff is driving to his house. Eventually, she arrives to knock on the door. She doesn't get an answer. What she hears instead is a noise coming from the shed. It prompts her to go there. Seeing that it is secured in several different ways, Dorney approaches it with caution. She gets frightened by a sudden bang and asks if anyone is there. She thinks it is Stanley's grandfather, so she shoots the lock that holds the chains in place. Shortly after, Stanley runs to her. The sheriff greets him kindly by pointing her gun at him. Getting on the ground, he advises her not to open the shed. It's not his granddad who's in there. It's Joe Bain. Of course, she does not believe someone she knows to be a delinquent. She is certain the boy is keeping his grandfather in there. Therefore, Dorney opens the door, only to have the vampire bite her neck. As if that wasn't enough, he also rips her arm off, before taking her into the shed with him. Shortly after, Marble arrives to get his revenge. Stanley tries talking to him, but the angry boy simply wants to fight. He kicks Stanley several times. As Marble keeps beating him, a frantic Stanley tells him the shed needs to be secured. Not listening to him, Marble equips himself with brass knuckles. He's about to deliver a painful hit with them, only to get interrupted by a gunshot behind him. It is Dahmer who holds the gun. He points it at Marble, who doesn't think Dahmer will shoot him. However, the boy underestimates the amount of anger that resides within the wielder of the gun. Dahmer gives a close warning shot to scare him. Stanley stands up, telling his friend to take it easy on Marble. They get into an argument again. Afterward, Dahmer points the gun at the boy he hates. This time, Marble starts begging him not to pull the trigger. Dahmer gives him verbal hell, to the point where Marble is forced to disparage himself. Now Dahmer wants him to get into the shed. Stanley doesn't want him to do it, but Dahmer does not want to hear it. At this point, Dahmer's mind is fixed. He won't listen to anyone telling him what he can or cannot do. This is the day that Dahmer had anticipated for so long, to get his revenge on the boy who made his life hell. As Marble is walking to the shed, he sees the sheriff's arm on the ground. It scares him even more. Dahmer gives him more hell, commanding the bully to enter the shed. Marble starts reflecting how he made a huge mistake in how he treated Dahmer. Based on that apology, Dahmer says he forgives him. Nevertheless, he still wants him inside. So Marble enters the dangerous shed, and the duo hears him get attacked. Stanley gets angry, asking his friend why he did that. As they argue again, Dahmer slams Stanley with the gun, causing him to lose consciousness. Later, the boy wakes up with Roxy beside him. He asks her where Dahmer is, and learns that no one is there except them. Then he closes the shed. It was open for an unknown amount of time. Roxy is confused about what is going on. When she observes the sheriff's arm on the ground, it scares her immensely. Stanley is forced to enter the shed because of how long it has been left open. He arms himself with a stick that he breaks in half. Walking slowly inside, he soon sees Marble standing there. It seems as though he is unconscious and is being held up. He falls to the ground, revealing the person who was holding him. That person is none other than Dahmer, who looks like he has become a vampire. He starts approaching Stanley, saying he is the strong one now. Stanley pleads for Dahmer not to do this. He calls him his best friend. In a short time, the boy who was once a sweet innocent kid jumps on Stanley only to get impaled by him with the stick. Making the most of the moment, Stanley puts Dahmer's arm in the sunlight, causing it to sizzle. The agony makes Dahmer lose consciousness. With that bittersweet victory, Stanley exits the shed. Roxy runs to hug him. She wants to know what is going on. At that moment, Dahmer rushes out of the shed. He crawls to them while burning. Stanley still considers the monster to be his friend and hurries to cover him with a sheet. After that, they both bring him back to the shed. Subsequently, we see a montage of the duo getting prepared to deal with this situation. They nail boards to all the openings in Stanley's house along with sharpened sticks. Joe is still out there, and they have to be ready for him. At a different time, Stanley tells her this mess is his fault, but she disagrees. He is sorry that he got her into this. He even wants her to leave before the sunset. At night, we see Joe getting up from the dirt in the woods. As the duo sits together, they get an angry knock on the door. Coming to the front door, Stanley sees there are two visitors, Marble's friends. After telling them Marble is not there, he advises them to leave. One of them feels uneasy about being there, yet the other, named Pitt, will not leave until Marble is found. During this verbal squabble, the other friend gets lifted by the vampire from above. In 2 seconds, his blood drips down, terrifying Pitt. He pleads to be let inside, so Stanley immediately opens the door for him. The boy loses his mind, prompting Roxy to tell him that Marble is deceased. Then we see the vampire destroying the power supply, causing the lights to turn off. Following this, Stanley discusses with Roxy about how they have the place secured well with planks. Stanley asks about the attic and learns that Roxy didn't know about its existence. They hear a loud noise coming from the ceiling and are forced to go up there to investigate. On the second floor, Stanley informs the other two of the 3 ways to destroy a vampire. Afterward, he says there are 3 rooms there, meaning they each enter one. If the vampire is in neither of them, they all enter the attic together. Each member gets ready before opening their respective doors at the same time. Entering the rooms, they cautiously search inside. Stanley looks at a shotgun on the wall of the room he's in. Pitt is the most frightened one. He closes a window that is bothering him with its consistent movement. Upon turning around, he gets a surprise from the vampire. Roxy is using this time unwisely, as she merely sits on the bed to look at photos in Stanley's room. Caught off guard, the vampire takes her too. Stanley hears her scream. He attempts to come to her, but a vampire, Pitt, and his friend stands in his way. Stanley quickly closes himself in a room, where he loads the shotgun with shells. Once Pitt breaks through the door, Stanley fires 2 shells through his head and into his other friend. 2 birds with 1 stone. In the meantime, the vampire is dragging Roxy in the attic. He's about to hurt her when Stanley yells out to him. He demands that the vampire let her go before shooting him. This one doesn't go down because it wasn't a headshot. He moves towards Stanley with super speed, tossing the shotgun away. The vampire follows this action by holding the boy in the air. Roxy finally pitches in, standing behind the vampire with the shotgun pointed at him. She shoots him in the head, yet their bad luck does not allow him to lose his life as easily as the other 2 lost theirs. Joe proves to be a much more formidable vampire, perhaps due to being one for a longer time. Trying to shoot again, Roxy discovers the weapon is out of ammo. Stanley takes his knife and throws it in the vampire's direction. With great reflexes, the powerhouse moves to the side, and the knife lands into Roxy's shoulder. The vampire comes to attack Stanley, allowing Roxy to use an axe to decapitate him. After their great victory, the duo places all the lifeless vampires in the shed. They light it on fire and watch it burn. It seems like Dahmer lost his life too. In the morning, they wake up in Marble's car together. Stanley asks her if she locked the trunk, but she thought he did. We see the trunk slowly opening, implying there's another vampire in there.